A locked door. A bride in a white dress. Fists pounding. "Papa, please." He doesn't answer. 200 guests waiting at a church. A groom standing alone at the altar. And a father who everyone trusted, holding a key, refusing to let his daughter leave. Why? She couldn't speak. He didn't listen. The guests didn't know. But by sunset, a truth buried for 27 years would rise from the ashes of one family's silence. A mother who died too young. A love that was never chosen. And a father who believed locking his daughter away was the only way to save her from his own mistakes. What happened next changed everything. This is that story. Let me take you back to the beginning. Because to understand why Robert Mitchell locked that door, you need to know who Sarah was, who her mother was, and what choice was made decades ago that set this entire tragedy in motion. Her name was Sarah Mitchell, 27 years old, soft-spoken, the kind of woman who believed in second chances and quiet hope. She had spent her entire life trying to make her father proud. He was a man everyone respected. Robert Mitchell, a retired judge, known throughout the community as fair, principled, and impossible to read. And then there was the groom. Daniel Hayes. A high school teacher. Gentle. Patient. The kind of man who wrote her letters by hand and remembered the small things. They had been planning this wedding for 8 months. The church was booked. The flowers were arranged. The guests had already started arriving. So why, on the morning of her wedding, would a father lock his daughter in a room and refuse to let her out? What could possibly justify destroying her joy? Was it shame? Was it fear? Or was it something darker, something that had been waiting in the shadows of their family for years, ready to finally break free? Sarah grew up in a house that felt like a museum. Everything had its place. Every word had weight. Her father had raised her alone after her mother passed away when Sarah was only 9 years old. Cancer, they said. It happened fast. One day her mother was braiding her hair in the kitchen, humming an old hymn. 3 months later, she was gone. After that, Robert became everything. Father, protector, teacher, judge. He never remarried. Never even dated. It was as if when his wife died, a part of him locked itself away and never came back. Sarah learned early not to ask too many questions. Not to push. She learned to read his moods by the way he held his coffee cup, by the length of his silence. She became the daughter who anticipated his needs before he spoke them. And for years, that was enough. But then she met Daniel. It was at a bookstore on a rainy afternoon. He had reached for the same novel she did, a worn copy of something old and forgotten. They laughed. They talked. And for the first time in her life, Sarah felt seen by someone who wasn't measuring her against a memory. Daniel didn't know her mother. He didn't carry the weight of her father's grief. He just saw her. They dated for 2 years before he proposed. It was simple. No grand gesture. Just the two of them on a bench by the river where they used to meet on Sundays. He asked. She said yes. And when she told her father, he stared at her for a long time, then nodded once and walked out of the room. She thought it was approval. She thought he was just being her father, reserved, thoughtful, protective in his own way. But there were signs she missed. The way he would go quiet whenever Daniel's name came up. The way he watched them during dinners, his jaw tight, his hands folded like he was holding something back. And then, 2 weeks before the wedding, Sarah found something. A box in the attic. Old photographs. Letters. And a journal that belonged to her mother. Inside were pages and pages of words Sarah had never heard before. Words about doubt. About fear. About a choice her mother had made long ago, before Sarah was born. a choice that her father had never forgiven. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The morning of the wedding, the house smelled like lilies and fresh bread. Guests had begun to arrive at the church. Sarah's bridesmaids were laughing in the next room, fixing their makeup, teasing her about being nervous. She wasn't nervous. She was ready. She had waited her whole life to feel this free. Her father had been quiet all morning. He stood by the window in his suit, staring out at nothing. Sarah walked up behind him, touched his shoulder. "Papa, are you okay?" He didn't turn around. He just said, "Go get dressed." So she did. She put on the gown. She fixed her hair. She stood in front of the mirror and for a moment, she let herself believe that everything was going to be perfect. And then the door opened. Her father stepped inside. His face was pale. His hands were shaking. And before she could say a word, he said, "This wedding is not happening." She laughed at first. She thought he was joking. But he didn't smile. He didn't blink. He just reached behind him, pulled the door shut, and locked it. The sound of the lock clicking into place echoed through the room like a gunshot. "Papa, what are you doing?" she said. Her voice was calm at first. Confused. He didn't answer. He just stood there, his back against the door, staring at the floor. "Papa, open the door." Nothing. "Papa, please." Still nothing. And then she started to panic. She pounded on the wood. She screamed. She begged. But he was already gone. Downstairs, the guests were starting to wonder. The bridesmaids knocked on the door. "Sarah? You okay in there?" Daniel stood in the church, checking his watch, smiling nervously, assuming she was just running late. But the whispers had already started. "Something's wrong. Where's the bride? Why isn't she coming down?" And in the hallway outside that locked room, Sarah's uncle tried the handle, then turned to the others and said the words that made everyone's stomach drop. He locked her in. If your heart is racing right now, comment, "I'm still watching." I want to see who stays with this story till the end. Chaos erupted. Daniel rushed to the house, demanding answers. The bridesmaids were crying. Sarah's aunt was shouting at Robert through the door, calling him a monster, a madman. But Robert stood firm. He wouldn't speak. He wouldn't explain. He just sat at the bottom of the stairs with his head in his hands, and when anyone asked him why, he would only say, "I'm protecting her." Inside the room, Sarah had stopped screaming. She sat on the floor, her dress pooling around her, and she cried in a way she hadn't cried since she was a child. She thought about her mother. She thought about the journal she had found. And slowly, piece by piece, the truth started to form in her mind. Her mother had been engaged to someone else before she married Robert. A man named Jacob. They had been in love. Planning a future. But Jacob's family disapproved. They said her mother wasn't good enough, wasn't from the right background. So Jacob's father intervened. He convinced Robert, who was a young attorney at the time, to pursue her mother instead. Robert did. And her mother, heartbroken and abandoned, eventually said yes. She married Robert. She had Sarah. But she never stopped loving Jacob. Robert knew. He had always known. And it ate at him. Every smile. Every quiet moment. He questioned it all. And then one night, when Sarah was 8 years old, her mother received a letter. It was from Jacob. He had found her. He wanted to see her. Just once. Her mother agreed. She met him at a diner on the edge of town. They talked for hours. Nothing happened. No affair. No betrayal. Just two people remembering what might have been. But someone saw them. Someone told Robert. And when her mother came home that night, Robert was waiting. They fought. She tried to explain. He wouldn't listen. And the next morning, she collapsed. The cancer diagnosis came a week later. But Sarah's mother always believed that the stress, the heartbreak, the weight of living a life she didn't choose, had broken something inside her that could never be repaired. She died 3 months later. And Robert, consumed by guilt, by regret, by the knowledge that he had built his life on a foundation of someone else's grief, made a vow. He would never let his daughter make the same mistake. He would never let her marry someone just because she thought she had to. He would protect her from a loveless life, even if it meant she hated him for it. Hours passed. The guests left. The church was empty. Daniel sat on the front steps of the house, head in his hands, silent. And finally, Sarah spoke. Not loudly. Not through tears. Just softly, from behind the door. Papa. I know about Mama. Robert, sitting on the other side, froze. I found her journal, Sarah continued. I read everything. I know about Jacob. I know what you think you did. Silence. But Papa, you're wrong. Her voice cracked. Mama didn't die because of you. She died because life is unfair. And she didn't regret marrying you. She wrote that. She wrote that you gave her me. That you gave her stability. That you loved her even when she couldn't fully love you back. And that was enough for her. Robert's hand started to shake. She forgave you, Papa. But you never forgave yourself. And then Sarah said the words that broke him. Don't do to me what fear did to you. Don't lock me away because you're afraid I'll suffer. Let me choose. Let me live. Even if it hurts. Even if it's hard. Let me be free. The lock clicked. The door opened. And Robert stood there, tears streaming down his face, barely able to stand. He looked at his daughter, still in her wedding dress, her eyes red but steady, and he whispered, I'm so sorry. The wedding didn't happen that day. But 3 weeks later, in a small ceremony at sunrise, Sarah and Daniel were married. It wasn't in a church. It was by the river where he had proposed. And Robert was there. He walked her down the aisle. He didn't smile. But he didn't look away either. And when the officiant asked, who gives this woman to be married? Robert took a long breath and said, she gives herself. I'm just honored to stand beside her. After the ceremony, Sarah hugged her father for a long time. And he whispered into her hair, your mother would be so proud of you. Sometimes the people we love most are also the ones we hurt deepest. Not because we don't care. But because we care too much. Robert didn't lock that door out of cruelty. He locked it out of fear. Fear that history would repeat. Fear that love would destroy her the way he believed it had destroyed his wife. But love isn't a cage. And protection without trust is just control wearing a kinder name. So I want to ask you. What would you have done if you were Sarah? Would you have forgiven your father? Do you think trauma can be passed down, from parent to child, like an inheritance we never asked for? Let me know in the comments. I read every single one. And if stories like this one, stories that make you feel something real, matter to you, then subscribe. Because next week, we're telling the story of a man who vanished for 30 years and returned on the day of his own funeral. You won't want to miss it. Thank you for watching. And remember, the doors we lock to protect ourselves are often the same ones that keep us from truly living.